for that. We are continuing with our sermon series. I know I was off last week, and there was a guy that was very similar in looks to me that was preaching here. I was glad for many of you that shared such wonderful things about his testimony and what he was able to witness to. So I want to thank you for supporting him and hearing such wonderful comments about how well he did. I know having a twin brother like that, we get to talk often, so I got to hear so many beautiful things that you shared with him, so thank you for that. We are continuing and picking back up our sermon series that we are looking at this path full of leaves. And you can't help but talk about leaves right now. You see them everywhere, right? You see them in your yard, see them on the road, see them on the sidewalks. That's kind of why we picked this as a topical thing. And we've been looking at the book or the wisdom of Proverbs in the Bible. It's an Old Testament book. But understand that the book was written so cleverly. I know when we read it in English, we miss certain things, but there were acronyms that were used in different ways in which it were written that are so beautifully put, which is why I decided to make this sermon series a path full of leaves, and then take that six-letter word leaves and kind of use it as our 6-week sermon series. And so that first week, we're using that letter L. We're looking at that listen and learn from the Lord. And then last time we met and talked about this was E. We move along in the word to embrace wisdom. Before we get to what the A stands for today, I want to ask you a question. How much would you be willing to pay? Now, you look at that, well, that's a cruise ship, that'd be a beautiful thing to be part of, to be on a cruise ship and go on a cruise. That'd be a great way to spend my time and things. And I found this story several years ago. It's a true story, actually. There was a 14-year-old girl. Her name was Laura, and whose appendix, while she was on the cruise ship, actually had burst. And she was vacationing with her family, and they were vacationing off the coast of the Baja Coast. Baja Coast is where it was. And the ship that was closest to them, they were hundreds of miles away from any help. And so the crew with this young girl on the ship sent out a distress call looking for the nearest surgical unit because, ruptured appendix, that's, a significant thing to her health. Would you know that the closest ship was the USS Ronald Reagan, an aircraft carrier? It was 500 miles away. And they answered the call. They answered the call, and the carrier itself was in the midst of training exercises with over 6,000 sailors on board. And you know what they did? They turned their ship around and headed towards that young girl. They steamed 250 miles through the night to get within, look at this helicopter transport. And they airlifted her, picked her up from the cruise ship, and airlifted her back on the Ronald Reagan, in which then they performed life-saving surgery to that young girl. The cost associated with that was $2.5 million per day. Per day. $2.5 million. Now, you talk about insurance costs and staying in a hospital. $2.5 million. Can you imagine filing that claim with your insurance carrier? You get a bill from the U.S. Navy for $2.5 million for my daughter's appendix surgery. And they're going to say, that's a little over budget, right? Well, did she have to pay for that high cost? Did their insurance company have to pay for that high cost? No, actually they did not. The cost, yes, was high, but the U.S. government believed that this little girl was worth saving. So they gave her a free gift of life for $2.5 million. What would that cost be? I want you to think through, ponder this as we look at our sermon today. How do you fill in the blank? Any cost for, and maybe you would say this too, for your family. You think about that situation, that story of that little girl having to have her appendix ruptured. Can you imagine being on that cruise ship so far away from the nearest and saying, do anything we can to save my daughter's life? And they sent out the distress call, and a U.S. carrier responded, and they saved her. Any cost for your family's life. Maybe it's any cost for wealth. People go to extreme costs to make a lot of wealth or money in their lives. Maybe it's any cost for fame, to be famous. Anything, I'll do anything to be famous in my life. Any cost for beauty. Oh, we spend a lot of money for getting our beauty, to make makeup and different things to cover blemishes and all that, and different things we try to look beautiful. Naturally beautiful, guys. That's a joke, obviously. Don't laugh too hard, though, Rick, okay? But any cost for beauty. But what about the concept we think of wisdom? Any cost for wisdom, as we've been talking about in this book of Proverbs, to gain that. Will we put a price tag associated with that? And today's message is actually entitled, Any Cost for Wisdom. Now, let's think about the value of our time, by the way. You know, if you do the cost for wisdom, if you exceeded the value of just 1 hour a week coming to church, and you had, look at this, perfect attendance, meaning you came every week for an entire year. Do you know how much time that would be of your life? Half of 1%. Would you consider that to be a high cost to get God or the wisdom of God by being in his presence? Just think about that. I'm not saying you need to be here every week, but think about that. From a perfect attendance would be half of 1%. That seems pretty cheap. And I'm not saying that you just spend your life and only get wisdom while you're in church and your devotional life and what you're doing. Well, how much is it? How much are you willing to spend of your life or give of your life to get godly wisdom in it? Something to think about. As we look at Proverbs chapter 4 today, the entirety of the chapter, verses 1 through 27. As always, I'll be reading from the NIV. And look at the little caption they have in the NIV. Get wisdom at what cost? At any cost. Hear now the word of the Lord. It says, listen, my sons, to a father's instruction. Pay attention. You ever say that to your kids? Pay attention. You're not listening. There's your little call there. Pay attention, everyone, and gain understanding. I give you sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching. For I too was a son to my father, still tender and cherished by my mother. Then he taught me, and he said to me, take hold of my words with all of your heart. Keep my commands, and you will live. Get wisdom. Get understanding. Do not forget my words or turn away from them. Do not forsake wisdom. And she, there's that personification, if you were here with us 2 weeks ago, of wisdom. It's talking about wisdom here. She will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. Look at this. The beginning of wisdom is this. Get wisdom. Though it cost you, cost all you have, get understanding. Cherish her, and she will exalt you. Embrace her, and she will honor you. She will give you a garland to grace your head and present you with a glorious crown. We'll pause right there in our story today to think about this cost of wisdom. He says it's going to cost you everything. But it is time spent with the Father here again. We mentioned this 2 weeks ago, and we're going to pick up again on this theme because in Proverbs chapter 2 and even in chapter 4 here we're looking at today, there's this great sense of this time spent with the Father. And you see, Solomon spending time with his son, trying to pass on. And you could just knew it because he was saying, pay attention, trying to get his kids to actually listen to what he had to say. And yet, when we look at today's verses, I don't know if you picked up on this or not, Solomon remembers time and words with his father David, so much so that he actually quotes him. And so I want you to think about this, or as a pondering point already. How well do you receive instructions and directions from your parents, or how well did you? So this is kind of just to keep that in mind as we're thinking about Solomon's son listening to his father speak to him. But in this moment, and these verses, and if you look at the scriptures itself in verses 4 to 9, you'll actually see a quote here. So this is Solomon actually quoting his dad. That's pretty impressive. That these verses, he says from verses 4 to 9, is an actual quote from the son's grandfather. He's getting to hear from his grandfather these words. And maybe this is just why, when you think about it, is that the words that David passed on to Solomon, he says, get wisdom. That's part of that quote, get wisdom. Telling his son, get wisdom. And how many times did his father, actually David, say that to Solomon? That when he's younger, now I said this the first week in this sermon series, 1 Kings chapter 3. Remember when God comes to him and says, I'll give you anything, irregardless of the cost, whatever you want. So at any cost, what do you want? And he could have probably picked wealth, fame, could be a famous king, to be the greatest looking guy in all of the kingdom. But at a young age, he says to the Lord, what? I want wisdom. Get me wisdom. Now, interesting enough, this is something that Solomon would have heard from his father. Now, maybe at his age, didn't quite understand what that meant, but he remembers from his dad, get wisdom. Get the wisdom of God in your life. And so then when the Lord comes to Solomon at a pretty young age, he says, what do you want? I'll give you anything. And what does he remember? the words of his father. I need wisdom. And so he gets that wisdom of God. So I ask you this. This is a little fill in the blank type thing for you. Do we blank anything our fathers have said to us? And I want you to use our words here. Do you remember anything your father used to say? Do you receive anything your fathers? Does anything resonate? Do you respond, repeat, or even, if we're honest, reject some of the things your dad would say? What are one of the things that you think about or maybe reject your dad would say? Do as I say, not as I. Isn't that horrible? That's horrible advice, because what you're saying is, what they're saying is that, I'm saying these things to you, act one way, but I'm going to act another way. Don't say that. Now, if you've said it, seek apology from your kids about it, But think about this. But this was something that David had passed to Solomon, and Solomon was trying to pass on his kids. And he remembers, and he asks, get wisdom. And that's what he asked for. He remembered that piece of it, because that was the Father's call. And it's been our call through this sermon series. What are you searching? I've had numerous people talk to me now already that they're reading through the book of Proverbs and like, man, this is great. Or I read, this proverb this week and it really touched me and helped me in this way. So it's a call that goes out. And it was a call that went from David to Solomon to his, get wisdom. Get wisdom is the call. And it's interesting, this is why the cost thing I added to this. Warren Wiersbe, in his commentary, and it's in his B series he had, he was a pastor and Christian writer, said, this get wisdom quote, it suggests something about buying wisdom. Because the Hebrew word in this sense here carries this idea of a commercial transaction, like you're going out to purchase something, to buy something. That's what it means in Hebrew. There's a price to pay, though, if you want to know God's truth. But I love what Warren says here, and obey it. You see, when you think about the cost, it's one thing to even come to church and know about God, or even to learn about God. But it's a whole nother thing, a whole nother level of cost when you have to obey God. And it's one of these challenging things that when you think about getting wisdom and the cost of it is more than just knowing it. You can say it, you can repeat verses to somebody, but if you're not living it, if you're not obeying it, there's a whole nother level of cost associated with it. That's what we're getting at today, I think. When you think about what it means to actually trust God, it's a whole other thing to obey God too. There's that piece of cost associated with that. So let's pick up then, and then picking up verse 10 for our chapter then. It says this, listen, my son, accept what I say, and the years of your life will be many. I instruct you in the way of wisdom and lead you along straight paths. When you walk, your steps will not be hampered. When you run, you will not stumble. Hold on to the instruction, do not let it go. Guard it well, for it is your life. Do not set foot on the path of the wicked, or walk in the way of evildoers. Avoid it. Do not travel on it. Turn from it and go on your way. For they cannot rest until they do evil. They are robbed of sleep till they make someone stumble. They eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. The paths, and this is 2 verses here I really like. The path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter till the full light of day. But the way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not stumble what makes them stumble. Wow, that's something powerful there. Verse 20 then, my son, pay attention to what I say. Turn your ear to my words. Do not them out of your sight. Keep them within your heart, for they are life to those who find them, and health to one's whole body. This is a key verse. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do. What's left out? For everything you do flows from it. Keep your mouth free of perversity. Keep corrupt talk from your lips. Let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. Give careful thought to the paths for your feet, and be steadfast in all your ways. Do not turn to the right or the left. Keep your foot from evil. And that's the end of the chapter. there is this reality, I think, that's associated here. This great cost or price of wisdom is keeping your life on the path of God. It's not easy. It's not an easy thing. It's going to cost you quite a bit to try and keep it on the path. There's going to be, paths where you kind of start walking off and things are going to happen, but it's this call to get back, and there is this great cost of staying on that path. But we know, and this is this time of year what we said about this sermon series, there are people who fall away all the time.